I'd like you to imagine just for a moment that you're part of a small house church way back in the first century, like not too far removed from the time of Jesus. One of the very first small house churches that kind of was starting to pop up. Now imagine though that the Apostle John is one of your pastors. The same John from the Gospels, the same John who wrote the Gospel of John, the same John who wrote this letter, in fact, and the same John that was perhaps one of the closest disciples of Jesus, that John. Now, Pastor John, however, can't physically be at your church every Sunday because your house church is part of a group of house churches that made up the wider Ephesian church. So John's primary ministry was at another location, probably not too far from where you are, but far enough that correspondence through letters is necessary, okay? But now your small house church, though, your little congregation is going through some issues. Most likely, some of the same kinds of issues that John has already written about in some of his previous letters. Remember, Betty just wonderfully read for us 3 John, or John's third letter, which means there were at least 2 previous letters that he had already written to these churches. If you ever, you're new to the Bible, if you ever go to the table of contents in the Bible there, you're going to see them listed as 1 John, 2 John, and now today we're looking at 3 John. Now, one of the big issues, one of the big serious concerns, for example, that John writes about in 2 John, for example, there were some false teachers who were beginning to start creeping in amongst their midst, trying to teach people things that Jesus or the apostles, they never taught. Like, for example, in the second letter, you've got teachers who refuse to believe that Jesus actually came down from heaven in the flesh, teaching only that Jesus kind of came down in some spirit-type form without ever being given a real physical body. You know, what's interesting is the issue today is people not really believing in the deity, the godness of Jesus. Back then it was the opposite, people not really believing in the physical human nature of Jesus. In other words, what they were denying, and here's a wonderful theological word for all of you to take home today. You know, you can talk about this over the lunch table. They were denying the incarnation of Jesus Christ. That's simply the idea of God actually taking on a human body and in so doing becoming truly God and truly human at the same time in the person of Jesus Christ. That's the incarnation. Think with me for a moment. By denying this and teaching against this, these false teachers were leading people away from believing the true gospel. Because if Jesus didn't have a physical body, didn't die an actual death on the cross, well then now you have no payment, the payment required, the death required, the shedding of real blood, Jesus' blood that was required for the cleansing and forgiveness of sins. So that was one of the major issues going on amongst these churches. But now coming back to your small house church though. There's a character in your church called Diotrephes. Diotrephes, some believe that your house church actually met at Diotrephes' place. We believe that because of what we've read and what we're going to read, some of the power he kind of held amongst the people there. And if you've ever been part of a church for long enough, you've probably come across a character like this. We don't know much about Diotrephes, but here's what we do know about Diotrephes. We know that he was a kind of character that didn't like accountability, didn't really enjoy being under someone else's leadership, refused to be under any authority within a church, even if it was the authority of the Apostle John himself. Here's what else we know. We know that he was probably quite influential there in the church because people were actually believing his nonsense. It seems though he had the power to pick and choose who could be part of your church and who would be kicked out. I mean, notice again the description we're given of Diotrephes in verse 9. John says, I wrote to the church, but Diotrephes, who loves to be first, will not welcome us. So when I come, I will call attention to what he is doing, spreading malicious nonsense about us. But get this, not even satisfied with that, he even refuses to welcome other believers, and he also stops those who wants to do so, and he puts them out of the church. It's like John, the Apostle John, he writes a letter to the church. Diotrephes rejects the letter. John sends brothers to the church to find out how they're going, but Diotrephes, he steps forward and refuses to welcome these traveling missionaries. And even worse, Diotrephes forcefully stopped anyone who even attempted to be hospitable to these missionaries, and he threatened to kick out. Imagine someone threatening to kick out of this church anyone who dared to be hospitable to someone else. But he didn't stop there. He goes as far as to gossip about the Apostle John publicly, spreading malicious rumors about his character. That's Diotrephes. You might be wondering, why do I bring up a character like this one here this morning, though? And it's because of this. For every Diotrephes, who sadly will be part of our churches at times, but for every Diotrephes, the church also needs a Gaius. Some say Gaius. I think it's Gaius. That's why I put the little thing there in quote marks. Gaius. For every Diotrephes, every church needs a Gaius. And not just one Gaius. Imagine a room full of Gaiuses. Brothers and sisters who faithfully are going to lead your church towards Christ. Brothers and sisters who are going to lead the church towards truth. Brothers and sisters who are going to genuinely and lovingly and sacrificially offer Christian hospitality to one another. And why do I bring up Gaius? We're in a series at the moment called Lesser Known Heroes of the Faith. And this morning we're going to be looking at this lesser known character from the New Testament. And like with our other lesser known heroes, we don't know much about this guy, but we do know this. And think about this for a moment, because this is kind of a big deal. That God wanted a letter written to this one guy, Gaius. God wanted a letter written to this one to be included in the Bible as holy scriptures, God's holy inspired word. And so therefore God wanted this letter that we're reading to be useful not only at Gaius' church, but also therefore, since it's been included, to be useful and used and encouragement to churches of all generations, including our church this morning. So what we're going to do, simply, we're just going to take some principles from the life of Gaius, and we're going to see what were some of those qualities that made him such a hero of the faith. So let's get right into it. But before getting to Gaius, let me just take one little step back, because there's something we can learn from before we get to Gaius. And that's just a couple of lessons. Okay, the Apostle John. Because for every, like we said, for every Diotrephes, there's a guy. For every Gaius, there's also usually a John. For every Gaius, there's usually also an Apostle John type figure who's been a vital part of your spiritual journey. A John who has been rooting for your spiritual success. Someone who's been like a spiritual father or a spiritual mother, a mentor, a friend. Someone who has encouraged you to become the man or the woman of faith that you are today. So here's the first lesson I'd like us to see from the Apostle John. It's this. Sometimes we spend so much time focusing on the problem people in the church that we forget to commend and encourage the faithful people. I was talking to Maru this week about this very idea, right? We're the tendency to focus on the negative, and straight away she's like, yeah, that's called negativity bias. And I was like, well, excuse me, miss, I recently graduated from becoming a counselor. Like, sorry for not knowing the technical term, right? And then she's like, I want you to look up this image. And then she made me bring up this image. I know it's all kind of a blur to me as well. But what it basically says is that like our brains are wired to actually respond more intensely to negative stimulation rather than positive stimulation, right? That's why if you ever turn on the Channel 9 news at 6 p.m., right, it's always mostly negative. Why? Because that hooks us in, that keeps us wanting more. That's why our favorite YouTube, or at least my favorite YouTubes, are the kinds of ones that are like, all like the negative, like watch these woke students getting destroyed by common sense, right? Because they're the videos that get reactions. That's why, hear this, that's why some of you here are probably still hung up on something terrible that happened earlier on in the week. Despite everything else since then going great, you still just can't shake that. It's because our tendency is to think more about the negative things going on instead of focusing on the positives. And the thing is, this happens in churches as well. And perhaps, especially maybe the elders, the pastors, ministry leaders of this church, maybe we might do well to pay special attention to this principle that John is giving us. Because don't we often have a tendency to focus on what people aren't doing or the lack of commitment in certain people instead of focusing on the faithful ones and focusing on the great things God is doing amongst us? And you know who didn't make this mistake? You know who didn't have a negativity bias in a sense? The Apostle John. Because before getting to the issues with Diotrephes, he first of all makes sure to acknowledge, commend, and encourage Gaius. So that's why the first half of this letter is basically just this letter of encouragement. Let me just highlight a few of those encouragements. To my dear friend Gaius, whom I love in the truth, he reminds Gaius that he is loved. Dear friend, I pray that you may enjoy good health. He reminds Gaius that he's being prayed for. I have no greater joy than to hear that you, my children, are walking in the truth. He reminds Gaius of the joy that he brings to John. One more, dear friend, you are faithful in what you are doing. He reminds Gaius that his works and his ministry, they're seen, they're noticed. So let me ask you to reflect on this for a moment this morning. Think about the people serving in the ministry that you're leading, perhaps. Or even just think about the people that you're serving alongside. Whether it's up here in the music, whether it's with the youth ministry on a Friday, the kids who are out right now, whether it's in the kitchen, whether it's at Aloha Care on a Wednesday. When was the last time you sent one of them? Hey, why not all of them? Just a simple word of encouragement. Thanking them for their faithfulness. Thanking them for serving us so well. And who knows, perhaps even today, you might even take a page straight out of John's letter and simply use some of those same encouraging words to encourage those that you're serving with. Hey, we love you. I'm praying for you. I see you. I've noticed your hard work. I've noticed how you're growing and how God is using you. And you know what? Whenever I think of you and of your service, it brings great joy to my heart. So I think that's the first lesson we might take from the Apostle John. Because even though it's John, if you notice, who calls Gaius a dear friend, a beloved friend, at least like 4 times throughout the letter, it's the Apostle John, however, who's showing us what it looks like to be a good friend. A good friend recognizes your work and your efforts. A good friend then seeks to encourage you with that. Because a good friend wants to help you become a man or a woman of faith, like John did for Gaius. So that's the first lesson from John. And here's the second one. And I promise we're going to get to Gaius. We will. But just one more, because this was too important to overlook. Another lesson from John. Look at verse 4 again, when John says, I have no greater joy than to hear that my children are walking in the truth. Now, we simply just don't know whether the Apostle John had any children of his own. I don't think we know that, or we read that anyway. Maybe history or tradition might have a word for that, but we don't know. So he could be talking about his own children, but that really wouldn't fit the context, right? Because he's got Gaius in mind in these verses. And so he seems to be talking about his spiritual children, the men and the women he was able to preach the gospel to, then was given the privilege, the honor of leading them towards faith in Christ. So it wouldn't be a stretch, I believe, it wouldn't be a stretch to believe that Gaius was the fruit and the product of John's gospel ministry, someone that he called a spiritual child. And as a spiritual father, did you notice what his greatest joy for his child was? There was no greater joy than knowing that his spiritual child was walking in the truth, following Jesus. And you know what? If you're a parent here this morning, any parents here, especially a Christian parent, I think there's an important lesson that you and I can take from John's word here. I wonder if you, as a parent, can say the same of your children. I have no greater joy than to hear that my children are walking in the truth. Just reflect on what he's saying there. What gets you more excited and brings you more joy? To hear that your son and daughter is getting good grades, maybe that's your greatest joy. To hear that your child got into the uni course that they were really wanting to get into, is that your greatest joy for them? Maybe to hear that they landed that top-paying job that they desired, or maybe that you desired for them. Now, of course, all those are great things. They should bring us joy. It's just that the problem is if it's your greatest joy. Because as parents, our greatest joy should be to know that our son or our daughter is walking in the truth and following Jesus with all of their heart, mind, soul, and strength. Parents, can we control that? Can we force that upon our kids? We know that we can't. That's only a work that God can do in their hearts and in their souls. And you know what? Let's be raw for a moment. Some of us may even have kids who aren't there for now. And they're not walking in the truth or following Jesus right now. But you know what? That doesn't change the principle that we can learn from John, though, does it? The fact that it would bring you such great joy to hear of your child thriving in their walk with Jesus. So therefore, you know what we can do? You know what we can do about it? We can pray for our kids in such a way that God hears it desired in such a way. We can pray for our kids in such a way that God knows that this would be the greatest joy in your life. Things like, God, even if it means that all of the other worldly, earthly, temporary stuff is taken away, or at least put on hold for now. But God, would you please, whatever it takes, would you please bring my child back into your truth? Because there's nothing in this life that would bring me greater joy than that. I wonder if that's the cry of every parent's heart here this morning. Like we said earlier, for every Gaius, there is a John who shared the gospel with them, discipled them, invested in them, did everything in their power to see them succeed and prosper spiritually. So you know what the first step, parents, again, in seeing your child become a Gaius? Be their John. That part is on us. We can plant the seed and then pray that God does the rest. But parents, that responsibility starts with us. That's our first ministry, in fact. Primary ministry. Being a John to them can't be outsourced. Not to kids' church. Can't be outsourced to the youth ministry or to the wider church. That first and primary role is on us. And we're going to be accountable to God for how well we fulfilled our first ministry. But that's just a couple of lessons from John. We get to move to Gaius, and very quickly we're going to do so. Two main principles that we can draw from his example that made him such a loved man of faith. Firstly, he was faithful. Secondly, he was hospitable. Two qualities that make someone a hero of the faith. Let's start with the first one, verse 3. It gave me great joy when some believers came and testified about your faithfulness to the truth. I don't think that's the right slide. Let's go back to, maybe I put the wrong slide up there. But anyway, it says, it gave me great joy when some believers came and testified about your faithfulness to the truth and how you continue to walk in it. Dear friend, you are faithful in what you are doing for the brothers and sisters, even though they are strangers to you. I remember speaking to my barber one day, and he said to me, quite seriously I might add, he said, there are only two things in this life that you need to be faithful to. Our wives and our football team. Now, mind you, this guy is a diehard Tigers fan, okay? So at least he's true about this. I don't know about his wife, okay? But at least he's faithful to his football team, because what other reason could there possibly be for staying with a team like that? But what was it for Gaius, though? What was Gaius faithful to? Well, we're told he was faithful to the truth. And just to make this as simple as possible to understand, whenever the Bible, especially in the New Testament, is talking about the truth, whenever it talks about the truth, it's not talking about religion. It's not talking about a set of moral codes of ethics, not talking about like a set of doctrines or beliefs. Instead, whenever you see that reference to the truth, try this. Allow your mind not to think of some words on a page, but to think of a person, a real life, living, breathing person, and that's our Lord Jesus Christ. That's who John is talking about here when he talks about, that's who Jesus is talking about when he himself says about himself, I am the way and the truth. It's the truth about Jesus. It's the truth that God came to us in Jesus Christ. It's the truth that Jesus was killed, the truth that he was brought back to life through his resurrection, and the truth that anyone who believes in Jesus and trusts in Jesus, you will be saved. And this is the truth, or better put, this is the person who just had taken a hold and taken a grip on Gaius' heart and life. And when Gaius was given this truth, now he's going to hold on to that truth, hold on to it for dear life by remaining faithful to it. I mean, think about what it means to be faithful to something or to someone. You love it, you cherish it, you protect it. You don't let anyone else mess around with it. And you certainly don't add to it. You don't add to truth. You know, I was thinking about this a lot recently, especially after some conversations I've had with some of you, asking about what kind of church we are, if we belong to some denomination or anything like that. And you know what? And I'm actually happy to go on record by saying this, but that's why I love our church and our, for lack of a better word, denomination, or I know they don't like using that word, but let's call it a network of churches. And whenever you talk about like loving our particular kind of church, I know people you might get turned off by even me saying that. And I will be the first to say that whenever you hear a pastor or a preacher even suggest that the truth is only spoken or found in their church, get out of there and run away from there as quickly as possible. So that's not what I'm saying at all. But here's what I am saying. I love that our church finds its roots in the open brethren tradition. And I was thinking about it. I don't think in 15 years I even mentioned those words at all, right? But then the more I studied this tradition, the more I've fallen in love with it. And don't let those words scare you. I mean, brethren is just the old school way of saying like brothers and sisters. And to refer to it as open simply meant that it started because they were open to anyone coming and joining in their fellowship. You can Google it. Find out the history for yourself. Just make sure you Google like open brethren and not closed brethren. Definitely make sure you don't Google exclusive brethren, okay? Because that is just a flat out cult, okay? And they're the ones that Current Affair loves to pick on, and rightly so. And it's actually because of them probably one of the reasons why our churches aren't really called Open Brethren anymore, but decided to now be known as I should know what we're called now, right? Christian Community Churches of Australia, CCC Ost. But now here's what I love about our tradition, is that the Open Brethren movement started out of a desire to simply stick with the gospel. To simply stick with the truths found in scriptures, nothing more and nothing less. So I've had people actually come to me and say, would we baptize an infant here at our church? And I've just simply had to say, well, no, we wouldn't. Simply because it's not found in the Bible. I've had people ask whether we would pray to the saints or do anything with icons, and I've had to say, no, we don't, simply because you're just not going to find that in the Bible. And I've also had people ask, and this is probably the most controversial one, given our day and age and the temperature of our culture. But I've had people ask whether we have women pastors and preachers at our church. And again, not because we don't think women aren't gifted or capable. In fact, I dare say, and I do believe this, I dare say that the women of our church are probably more gifted than most of us men, if we're being real. It's just that you won't find women pastors and preachers prescribed in the Bible as the kind of model for church that God intended. It's as simple as that. I know that sounds very archaic, primitive, patriarchal, and I'm okay with that. I think we're okay with that. You know why? Because we believe that we have the same mandate and the same responsibility and the same calling that Gaius had. And that was to simply be faithful to the truth of the gospel, to the truth found in the scriptures, nothing more, nothing less. So Gaius was faithful to the truth. And now secondly, John mentions one other thing that Gaius was faithful to. And this leads to the second quality that made Gaius such a man of faith. Gaius was faithful to other believers. Look at verse 5 again. Dear friend, you are faithful in what you are doing for the brothers and sisters, even though they are strangers to you. He's not only faithful to the truth, but his faithfulness to the truth is expressed in a very tangible way. It's expressed and evidenced through his ministry of hospitality. And what that was probably in most reference to was the ones who experienced Gaius' hospitality firsthand. Those traveling missionaries, a group of believers, kind of came into town. They're welcomed into Gaius' house, shown love, shown hospitality, and then they return back to John and they tell him about this kind of love and this generosity that Gaius showed him. And I've experienced this firsthand too. I remember back during my time at Bible college in Argentina, many, many years ago now, but I remember I had the real honor of being welcomed into many, many homes across that country. See, one of the benefits of knowing English while I was at Bible college, I got to travel all over the country as an interpreter. Groups from the US would come to Argentina on short-term mission trips, and so our Bible college was the ones who would provide the interpreters, and so that we'd get to travel with these Americans all over the country. Now, pretty much every time, we would never be put up in a hotel or anything like that. We'd be asked, Christian families in the areas, they'd asked to host us. Families who were part of the churches we were working with. And that's who we'd stay with. Now, most of the time, these families weren't well off at all. It's not like they had spare bedrooms like many of us do, just lying there, waiting for traveling missionaries to come and stay with them. It wasn't like that at all. In fact, they allowed themselves to be stretched big time for that week. Usually it meant putting all the kids into one room and leaving one room spare for the rest of us. So for those years, I remember I got to experience firsthand what a Gaius look. In fact, what whole families of Gaiuses look like, putting real Christian hospitality into practice. So again, if you ask me, about 3 John and what's going on here, these aren't just words on a page to me. This is something that I know is real. This is something that I've seen firsthand when someone or people or families love Jesus and love people that much. It's possible. Now, I do hear some questions though. Some questions that some of you might have at this point. Because you might be like, but what if I don't have a home? Or I'm just not in the season where I can be hosting anyone. Maybe because of my age, maybe because of some health issues, I just can't show hospitality at the moment. And those are fair questions. So here's a word of encouragement for you this morning. You know, some have suggested that perhaps Gaius' health wasn't that great at all. And perhaps there was some illness or sickness that he was struggling with, which is why John says to him at the intro, he says, "Dear friend, I pray that you may enjoy good health, that all may go well with you." He's praying for his health. Again, that's just speculation because we can't know for sure. But let's just say we run with this idea that Gaius' health wasn't that great. Well, even that didn't stop him from finding some way of being part of the mission. Finding some way of having a hand in the work of the gospel being spread. So for you, maybe it is your health. Maybe it's your age. Maybe it's your current circumstances. Simply for you, God just has you faithfully working your job, staying in the one city, carrying out the responsibilities of day-to-day life. And that's why you may never find yourself on the front line of mission work. But here's the thing though. Even though you might not be able to go to the mission field, you know who can go? You know what can go? Your prayers can go. Your prayers, nothing stopping you from your prayers going there. Your practical support can go. You know what else can go? If you can't go, your money can go to support these missionaries. No matter what season of life we find ourselves in, there's literally nothing stopping us from being part of the mission and having a hand in seeing the gospel spread. But now coming back to Gaius' form of hospitality though, here's a practical application for those of us who do have homes and we are able to open up our homes. At least it's something for all of us to consider. At least consider it this morning. Perhaps the next time we do put out a call for some traveling missionaries who are in town needing to be hosted for the weekend or for a few days, needing a place to stay. Or maybe it's just a call out for any brother or sister who may be needing a place to stay for a while. Imagine this church. Imagine being the kind of a church where we have too many options. Too many options because that's how many of us are willing to show this kind of Christian love and hospitality. And you know what? I don't think hospitality also always has to be something as big as offering accommodation. It is that. It can be that. Maybe it's something as simple as inviting someone over into your home for lunch, dinner, breakfast, a meal, after a tea, whatever it is. Simply as a way of saying, I see you. I notice you. I'd love to get to know you better so that we can find ways to encourage one another. See, I love how this one author sums up this idea of Christian hospitality. It's a little lengthy, but it's worth it. He writes, "Not everyone can serve in a foreign land, lead a relief effort, or volunteer at the downtown soup kitchen. But who can't be hospitable? Do you have a front door? A table, chairs, bread and meat for sandwiches? Well, congratulations. You've just qualified to serve in the most ancient of ministries, hospitality." Something holy happens around a dinner table that will never happen in a sanctuary. In a church auditorium, you see the back of heads. Around the table, you see expressions on faces. In the auditorium, one person speaks. Around the table, everyone has a voice. Church services are on the clock. Around the table, there is time to talk. Hospitality opens the door to uncommon community. It's no accident that hospitality and hospital come from the same Latin word, for they both lead to the same result: healing. When you open your door to someone, you are sending this message. You matter to me and to God. You may think you are saying, come over for a visit, but what your guest hears, I'm worth it. I'm worth it. So coming back full circle to your little house church that we started with. See, on the one hand, you've got a Gaius. On the other hand, you've got a Diotrephes. Two men who were part of the same church, but who influenced the church in such completely different ways. One man is held up as a model of faithfulness, a model of hospitality, as a model of the kind of love that we should be showing to one another. But the other man was a gossip. He loved to be first. He rejected the idea of hospitality. And in so doing, he became a hindrance to God's work there in the church. A hindrance to God's work within the church. And that's a pretty good question to end with, I reckon. What kind of an influence, what impact am I having on this church, here at Alawood Church, our church? Am I a Gaius or am I a Diotrephes? You might think, I'm not a gossip, I'm not first, I'm not kicking people out. No, but are you a hindrance to God's work in any way? Because please hear this. Even if it's just my complacency, not being involved. Because whether you believe it or not, complacency can be a hindrance to God's work being done here at Alawa. Or on the other hand, will you this week determine in your hearts to be Gaius? A model of faithfulness to the truth and a model of faithfulness to our brothers and sisters through your love and hospitality. But also, one last word to parents. Parents, this week, are we going to determine to be like John to our children? Will you this week, if you haven't already, share the gospel with them? If you haven't already, start to disciple them. Invest in them. Root for them spiritually, for them to prosper spiritually. Do everything in your power to see them succeed in their walk with Jesus. And if it isn't your heart's desire already, would you ask God today that it would be? That your greatest joy in this life would be to know that your children are walking in the truth.